policing. I'll tell you what community policing is not. Community policing is not creating a situation where the communities feel that the police are an occupying force policing their community. That is not community policing. And we're going to have a long talk about that and how we can move forward. How do we rebuild trust between the officers and the community? And how much of our policies made it difficult for officers even to have interactions between themselves and the community unless they're actually enforcing something or investigating something. And we need a different relationship than that. So that's why we're going to look elsewhere. I'm a big believer that Montgomery County does not have all the answers. People like to talk about the Montgomery County way. Montgomery County is not the be all and end all of ideas. And we're going to be sure that we look at other people's ideas and particularly other people's practices to see if what they've been able to achieve in that process. We are also looking at our programs involving de-escalation and the availability of mental health support. We have already met with one group. We're having a second meeting with them, and we're going to be looking at the Cahoots program, which comes from the West Coast, to see how that works. And we're going to revise our own program, which is very limited. We have one team that can go out, and the odds of one team arriving on time any place in the county, unless it's close to where that team is slim and none. We need to make sure that we have the resources in the local departments so that people are available in a very short period of time rather than what it is right now, which is too long a period of time. We especially need to look at mental health support. We're in discussions with hospitals about what can we do in terms of sobering centers or temporary places to bring people having incidents either related to drugs or alcohol that don't require policing but require health support. I'll say that I agree with a lot of the folks who've spoken over the past weeks, particularly about the use of police for things that police don't need to be used for. And I think pointing out, which isn't a police fault, but which is truly a social failing, that so much of what we do has been loaded on the police. If homelessness problems become police problems, mental health problems become police problems, alcohol problems become police problems, there's a whole bunch of things that ought to be handled by social service agencies and also more full treatment for people and more support for people rather than incident by incident support. So we're looking at what we can do to beef up our services, and we're going to look at the police department in terms of how money is used in the police department. How much is used for policing in the sense that we think policing should be done? How much is tied up in the police doing things that should probably be better done by other people? And hoping that provides us with opportunities to shift funding from the department to the agencies that really should be carrying out this work. We need to definitely work on our training aspects. I mean, I've had the opportunity to talk to people who've gone through the training academy. We definitely need more training in the art of talking to people and engaging people and engaging the community more than in an enforcement capacity. And in the end, hopefully we get to rebalance county investments into safe communities and prioritize investments along community needs. That's going to take some serious work on our part, and it may require a willingness to pay for things that we're not currently paying for. And the money may not come as easily from other things, and we may need to make increased investments. But if we're serious about this, and I feel the same way about the coronavirus, you have to do what you need to do, and you can't worry about only how much it costs. You have to be focused on, does it solve the problem? And if it means we need to spend more money to solve some of the problems, then I believe we need to be willing to spend more money to solve some of these problems. So I'll say that, I guess I'll close by saying I look forward to working with the committee we appoint. I look forward to working with the council. I look forward to working with the committee that we've jointly appointed. And hopefully by the time of the next budget, we can begin to have a reshaping of priorities and a redistribution of resources that reflect better what we know we need to do more fully as a county, and wind up with less reliance on the police to do the job that other parts of the county government ought to be doing. And I guess I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, County Executive Elrich. We will now hear remarks from our Police Chief, Marcus Jones.
So good morning. First, I would like to say that I am looking forward to working with County Executive Marc Elrich in this vision for reimagining public safety. I think this is an important time for us to really take a look at the police department and our functions. And I, again, looking forward to the opportunity to share, along with my staff, pertinent information that needs to be for people to be educated about policing in Montgomery County, and where information stems from as it relates to training and how we actually function each and every day. And one of the things that I had brought to County Executive Elrich when we first talked about me taking a position, and during my confirmation hearing before the council, was to talk about doing an external audit for this department. And I am glad to see that we are proceeding to move in that direction, because I always believe that it's important for us to be talking about the realities of what's going on within our police department, for transparency to occur, and for folks to know exactly how things are functioning, and really looking more into not only just the data, but looking into the system itself, and how we are also having some impact in different parts of our community, whether it be positive or negative, but that this outside group would be able to provide the actual the information from a different view, and it not just be coming from the police department. And I also have presented with to the county executive the reorganization plan of positions within the police department that are being reallocated for a different purpose, that I think is relevant to the county executive's to his overall plan about promoting safe neighborhoods and our traffic safety, that goes towards Vision Zero. And I think that we are moving forward in a way that shows that we are committed to adding different types of different types of when I look at it, let me say it this way. I think it's important for us to provide a different vision in some regards about how we look at community engagement, and that is forthcoming, and we're excited about having that opportunity. And I would say this as it relates to the mental health world, and as well as some other things that have been impacting policing. Policing has been, for the longest time, I think, been pushed to address these issues based upon failures of federal, state, and local leaders along the way as it relates to mental health. And the police departments have been really provided really with no choice but to deal with these issues as it relates to our communities. And so I'm glad to see that there's efforts moving towards that. There's other options being considered that will allow policing to really be removed in most cases. And there's going to be some cases that we're still going to have some involvement in, but in most cases, we will be glad to see that we'll be able to give this to the subject matter experts and the professionals in the field of mental health, and other fields as well, that will be reallocating police service calls that normally we will be getting via our communications center, that these calls will be diverted and be handled in another way. So again, I look forward to having these discussions and to moving this forward, to making policing better in Montgomery County. It is always our department's mission to strive to be better community partners in order to provide this as a safe community. And overall, we do have a very safe community that I think that needs to be acknowledged. And at the end of the day, though, we can always be better to provide the service that this community so rightly deserves. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Jones. For those that may have joined us late, we do have a list of panelists who were speaking. At the conclusion of all of their presentations, I will open it up for questions. So if you do have a question, please indicate so in the chat box, as well as the news organization that you represent. We will take questions from the media, but for others who have joined us, you're more than welcome to indicate that you would like to ask a question in the chat box as well. We will now hear from the president of the Fraternal Order of Police with Lodge 35, Mr. Torrie Cooke.
Good morning. I just want to say that over the past couple of weeks, we've been having positive conversations with the county executive and police chief and some members from the county council. The focus of Lodge 35 is to have discussions on improving policing, and those discussions being driven by facts so that we can work toward meaningful solutions. Our goal, and I believe everyone's goal within Montgomery County, is to improve policing and the quality of life of Montgomery County residents. And we look forward to having those conversations and being involved in those conversations. I have the ability to look back and see how policing used to be in Montgomery County, and how policing was modified and how policing is now. And I think that we've moved away from our non-traditional policing, which was a structured policing in 1994 when we went to a style of community policing within Montgomery County. In that style of policing within Montgomery County, there were several options to include services that police officers could call upon when they were involved in different situations. That rarely exists now. I think the lines of communication and the product that we had before has degraded, and we are now doing more of a traditional policing than a non-traditional policing. It's important to get back to our primary goal, which is to make life better for the community. And in doing so, I'm glad to see that the county executive is looking towards more of research, data, reviewing policies, reviewing how policing's done, reviewing how training's done, so that we can better police, and that we can design those models where we can serve the community better. I think that is a great option that we're moving towards right now with analyzing and then reviewing data and then making decisions based on that data. Because otherwise you're just making policy and moving forward without considering what kind of policing you want and how the police officers you have here should be policing. And there should be clear direction. And certainly there was clear direction back in the early 90s when I first started with community policing, and we need to get back to that clear direction and get back to providing services for police officers so they don't have to encounter certain situations which have been pushed on them by the inability to fund certain social services by government. So I'm happy to have the conversation. I think the kind of conversation needs to be had, and I think it needs to be a rational conversation, and so it can lead us to common sense changes. And policing should always be looking to change and move forward. It shouldn't stay stagnant. And I believe that's where we've been for the last 15 years or more. And we need to get back and move forward and address those things in the community.
Thank you, President Cooke. We will now hear from our Director of Health and Human Services, Director Raymond Crowel.
Good morning, Montgomery County, and good morning to you all. And I'm happy to have an opportunity to talk about this issue. As a psychologist, it's been near and dear to my heart for a lot of years. The county executive's comments make it very clear that public safety is not just a matter of policing. The choices that this country has made over many decades are part of what has led us here to this moment in time. You know, when we look at the pandemic, we see evidence of some of the choices that were made that have weakened our health systems and weakened our behavioral health systems in particular. Closing of state hospitals, defunding of mental health centers, lack of affordable health care, an increased emphasis on managed cost rather than managed care has left us with limited alternatives over the years, especially for those with mental illness or addictions. As a result, our prisons and jails, even here in Montgomery County, have become often the default hospital where you can get help if you're arrested and incarcerated for some period of time. I think that is one of the problems that we see all across the country, but we see it here. 20 to 30% of the persons who are sent to county corrections facilities have some mental health or substance use disorder, and we know there's a disproportionate number of persons of color that are included in those in that incarceration. Our children are showing up with increasingly complex mental health challenges as well, and often, although the schools are referring more children to behavioral health crisis services, they're also taking actions that open up the possibility of a school to prison pipeline that we've seen documented nationally and locally. I think that unfortunately, what's happened is that arresting people puts them in a correctional system and they might get the help that they need, but at the cost of potentially a criminal record, which sets the stages for other problems that they have that can't be met. We have asked law enforcement over the decades to take on more and more of a role of social worker, of therapist, and case manager. And there's an element of that, to be quite honest, in all police work. Anytime they encounter somebody in the community, they have to have that hat on to think about what's going on with this human being. And I think that the training reflects that and needs to continue to reflect that and even more strongly reflect that. But there are a lot of instances where law enforcement should not be the first call or a first response to a person who's obviously in distress with or has a mental health crisis in their streets and or substance use disorder. We've got a broad array of services to help people to get out of corrections, but sometimes such as mental health court and drug court. But where we need to be stronger, I think, is on the front of the system before an arrest has to be made. And I think there are just 4 or 5 things that I think that we need to do as part of how we re-envision, or we need to think about as how we re-envision this public safety. One of them is a mobile crisis capacity that is regionalized, that isn't centralized, that is stronger than it has been in recent years, so that we can get there faster, so that we can get there, so that human services people can be on the scenes before police arrive, instead of police, with police if necessary, to help de-escalate and create an alternative to an arrest, but also after, in case police arrive and they see that this isn't a situation that is a police matter, but needs our support and service, so that we can work in tandem and in partnership with law enforcement in a stronger and more responsive way than we have in the past. The second one, I think, is that we need alternatives to arrest for people who have behavioral health problems or substance abuse problems, access to places where they can stabilize, and an alternative for a law enforcement officer, if they have to pick up someone, to not necessarily have to take them to 7 Locks or to the jail, but to create an opportunity for them to interact with behavioral health professionals so that they can be helped to stabilize and given some alternatives. The third one, I think we need are stronger ties in the community, the communities that we serve, not just linguistic capacity, but also cultural and religious connections that require not just for policing, but for county services and support, so that we are tailoring what we do to the regions of the county that we have to serve, so that it's what they need when they need it, and how they need it, and in a way that actually is helpful to them. And the fourth one, I think, is a longer and larger and continuous lift, and that is improved access to services and supports to treatment, whether that's addictions services or homelessness prevention services or housing services, healthcare, that whole array of things, much of which sits in Health and Human Services, but is not the sole province of HHS. There are partners that we have to work with to make this work. I think as part of this process, we're going to have to draw on national and local expertise. We're going to have to work with the county council, our hospitals and providers in the community, and with the community members to identify the best practices necessary to strengthen and grow the kind of human service response that has been faltering for many years in the county and in truth across the country. So I'm looking forward to this process again, and I want to thank the county executive for launching this initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Crowel. We have two more speakers. We will hear from two council members. Next up is Council Member Tom Hucker.
Thank you, Ms. Sturgis. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Hucker. I'm the Vice President of the Montgomery County Council, and I serve on the Public Safety Committee. My district includes Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, White Oak, and the eastern portion of the county. And unfortunately, it's been the site of the deaths of Emmanuel Okatuga and Robert White and Fanon Burhi in the last 10 years. Thank you so much to County Executive Elrich, to Chief Jones, to ACAO Sturgis, and to Director Crowel for really rising to this challenge and meeting this important moment and taking it so seriously. We're living through an incredible national moment where, for the first time really since the 1960s, I think the entire nation is paying attention to the many inequities that have existed in our country for generations. Both COVID and the tragic murder of George Floyd have put the spotlight on those inequities and the structural racism and the discriminatory laws and policies that have created them. As someone who's a longtime community organizer, it's really inspiring to me to see so many Americans taking the time to educate themselves about elements of our history and about our current society that they didn't learn in school. Almost every book on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list is about racial equity. And it's encouraging to see massive community action taking place. I want to thank all of our residents who have participated in over 60 rallies and marches in Montgomery County and have been in the streets pushing for change. We hear you, and we're all here putting together a response to the constituent voices that we continue to hear. I've participated in several town halls and marches, joined many of the protests in our community, calling for policing reform, and I'll continue to promote and support those efforts. Our entire county council has been very active on racial justice and policing reform for the last couple years. It really didn't start in the last few weeks. As a few examples, giving credit to all my colleagues, the council established the Racial Equity and Social Justice Act, sponsored by Councilmember Navarro last year, which brings an equity lens to all county policies, requires a racial equity analysis of every new policy we consider, and it creates the Office of Racial Equity. We passed the LET Act that was sponsored by Councilmember Juando, which seeks to improve the public's trust in law enforcement in police-involved investigations. Councilmember Reamer led the way to sponsor legislation we all supported, creating a police advisory commission that we're proud to say has now over 200 people have applied to serve on the commission from throughout Montgomery County. And in the wake of the tragic murder of George Floyd, the council just declared racism as a public health crisis and introduced Bill 2720 to update our use of force policy. And finally, working with my colleagues, I introduced on Tuesday a special appropriation to increase our mobile crisis response that you've heard about to respond to residents experiencing psychological crises and dealing with substance abuse. National studies have confirmed what Chief Manger and Chief Jones have told us in the Public Safety Committee for years, that a large portion of the 911 calls that go to our police department are related to mental health or substance abuse. And we just heard Director Crowel describe this and point out that they're disproportionately our Black and brown residents. These calls, for too long, the only tool we've had in that toolbox, as the county executive says, to send to those calls of residents in crisis have been armed police officers. And that makes no sense. We need to have behavioral health professionals that are trained in crisis response, positioned around the county and available to respond in real time. So I introduced that special appropriation with the support of all my colleagues this week. We can begin the recruitment right away. And while there are several effective models that Director Crowel described around the nation, we'll spend the next few months working with the county executive and his department heads in a multi-agency work group to decide the best model or combination of models for Montgomery County. But it'll be so much better wherever we land to have mental health professionals involved in these calls, able to respond and able to take our residents in crisis to a safe facility rather than to a hospital, which a police officer has to take someone to now, or to Seven Locks and to that facility. So I'm very grateful to all my colleagues for supporting this whole idea. To make real progress in addressing police violence, we really have to reimagine public safety, as the county executive said. The community is demanding change, and our county government has to be responsive. One special appropriation or one policy is not going to magically resolve our policing challenges or dismantle racism. It's going to take a collective effort at all levels of government, working with stakeholders and especially with impacted communities to bring about real and lasting change. And that's exactly what the county executive is announcing today, is a comprehensive approach working with the county council, Chief Jones, President Cooke, Dr. Crowel, and other stakeholders to lead a multi-pronged approach. So I'm very grateful for your leadership on this. We really have to reimagine public safety. We all want safe communities, but we can't continue to achieve safe communities only through a reactive approach, including policing and mass incarceration and other punitive measures. The root causes of crime have to be addressed by reforming our society to ensure everyone has a living wage job, equitable access to education at all levels, quality healthcare, including mental health, and affordable housing. And we cannot and should not have to do this alone in Montgomery County. Specifically, we need state assistance and federal help to adequately fund mental health and to get guns off our streets. We can't do that by ourselves. It's a fact, though, that societies that have less income inequality, more economic opportunities, more affordable housing, and adequate mental health care, and fewer guns on the street, all those societies have less crime and need less policing to generate safe communities. People keep asking how we feel about the phrase defunding the police. I don't see that as a particularly new or radical idea. Progressive voters for years have asked for more funding of human needs so we can afford to spend less money on policing to achieve safe communities. Our budgets get reviewed every year and should reflect the need in every area. The fact is we don't invest enough in mental health, in affordable housing, and making sure everyone has a living wage job. And if we take care of our human needs adequately, we will have the safe communities we want. We have to recommit ourselves to achieving freedom and justice and equity for all Americans. It's never been clearer that we must make deep and lasting changes to dismantle oppression, to reform our systems, and to be explicitly anti-racist. This is one of our first steps in the journey, but I look forward to continuing this work with all the speakers today, all my colleagues on the council, and the rest of the public. Thank you so much for having me today.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. We have one more speaker before we will get to our questions. Our last speaker for the day, thank you so much, is Councilmember Will Jawanda.
Thank you, Ms. Sturgis, and thank you to County Executive and to my colleagues and to the Chief and everyone who's here. This is obviously a critical time in our nation's history. We have an opportunity, and not only an opportunity, a responsibility to improve and reimagine public safety so that all of our residents can feel safe and don't experience the disparate treatment that we know is happening. I think it's important to say that this has been a problem since policing started. Since the first slave patrols were formed in the South to round up escaped African-American slaves, enslaved individuals, through post-Reconstruction, when police were used to keep communities in line, and through a failed war on drugs and a system of mass incarceration that leads the world, mostly people that look like me, being locked up. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that we're not immune to that in Montgomery County. And while we have great people, men and women who have served in the police department, I worked for a year as an AmeriCorps intern in 1999 and 2000 with the police department, and have many friends that are still serving. that system that has been birthed in this country is present here. In 2000, we had a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice here in Montgomery County for our policing practices. So this idea that it suddenly happened is just not the case. And that's okay, because the country's struggling with this and has struggled with this. But we today, in the last weeks and months after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Fanon Burhay and Robert White and so many others, America has woken up that we need to change and dramatically change this unjust system. And that's a good thing. And we're going to need everyone on this call and all these partners working together, legislative, executive, the police department, the union, all of us, community members, to get it done. Because you don't extricate the problems from a system that's been around that long with that many issues embedded in the bias and racism of this country just overnight. So this is a great conversation. I wanted to come and participate because I think it's important that we work together to get this done. It's not going to be one step that we take or one approach. We're going to need to do many things, and we're going to need to do them all at the same time. And we're going to have staying power even after these protests die down. We need, as part of reimagining, that's going to take everything from our hiring practices, what we prioritize and who we hire and what communities they come from and who they're familiar with, to training, to what we prioritize and track, to the type of enforcement we do. I've talked about this a lot with many people. We need to be tracking positive interactions, just as we track arrests and tickets in negative interactions. And we need to reward and incentivize based on how many people we've helped, how many situations have we de-escalated, how many community events have we attended. We need to change that system. When I worked in the federal government, the Burn JAG grants, they gave more money to local departments that had more arrests. That's the wrong incentive structure. Because what happens then is that you have a system that prioritizes that, and you go to communities where you think, because of the implicit bias and racism embedded in all of our systems, that's why we introduced the resolution I drafted declaring racism a public health emergency, because 1 in 1,000 Black men will be killed by police. 1 in 3 will spend time in prison. 1 in 2 will be arrested. Like me, I'm one of those that have been arrested. That type of system, you must change the prioritization. And then you must reallocate funding. And that's why I'm really proud to be participating in this today and part of this process. We don't need police in schools. We don't need police responding when people are experiencing homelessness, when people are dealing with mental health crises, as been discussed. There are programs that have been effective in changing those outcomes in other parts of the country. So we need to dramatically move in that direction. And we need to do so as we consider the savings plans that are coming up this year, in my opinion. And then finally, we need transparency and accountability in a big way. The first bill that this council introduced, as was mentioned, was a bill I drafted, the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, to require independent investigations and public reporting when police are involved in the death of a resident. But we're going to need changes at the state level to make sure that we know when officers have committed offenses in other jurisdictions, so that the chief can know that, the community can know that, and that can be taken into account. We're also going to need more accountability and changes in our use of force policy. We introduced a big bill last week that I wrote with my colleagues that will raise the standard of when deadly force can be used and ban certain types of tactics like chokeholds and hitting restrained individuals, and create the duty to intervene consistent with the policy that the county executive announced last week. But we're going to need to do more there as well. So we have to do all those things. But it starts with recognizing that the system can and must be better for people, because people experience policing in dramatically different ways. And we need to lower the type of interactions that happen all too often in our communities of color. So look forward to working with the executive and the entire team to making that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member Jawando. Also want to give thanks to additional council members who have joined us today. I see that council members Albernos, Friedson, Glass, and Rice are also on the call. Really thank you for your support, and know that you are equally as concerned about this issue. Since we've been here for about 48 minutes. We were scheduled for an hour. We know that there are a number of questions that have come in through the chat. So far, we will take questions from media. The first one I have is from Mr. Scott Broom with WUSA 9. If we can allow Scott to speak, please.
I am unmuted at this time. Here we go. I put the question in chat. We've talked broadly and specifically about some of these issues, but I'm really interested in local, highly localized metrics that we have right now that indicate whether or not there are significant issues. I don't know what those metrics are. I provided some examples in the chat, for instance, use of force trends over the last years in terms of complaints, figures on disproportionate use of force. So what I'm asking is, could you all cite some metrics as examples and react to them and tell me how they illustrate all of this? Perhaps Mr. County Executive could lead that.
Okay.
Am I muted? I'm okay. Okay. So I was in a meeting with one of our citizens who did a dive into Montgomery County's data. We have an open data portal. I will say translating the portal sometimes can be challenging, but the data is there. And he cited 95,000 stops and traffic stops in Montgomery County. And I'm going to get these numbers wrong slightly probably, but basically 57% were Black, 28% were Latino, remaining 15% were white and Asian. And then he followed that process all the way through. So here's the stops, who gets a ticket and who doesn't get a ticket, also disproportionate. And of course, it doesn't end with the ticket, it goes to court, and he followed the court stuff. Who got sentenced and how people got sentenced, disproportionate. So we have this, I think, deeply in our system, more than just the police department, but how people look at people and judge them, which I think carries a lot of implicit bias with it, seems to be endemic. And I've heard anecdotally that stops involving use of force are disproportionately African-American. And what we're looking for is the OLO is going to come out with a report with lots of data. And I believe that report's coming out in a week or two at the latest. So Scott, you should be able to get a full read on the information they collected. And then once we see that report, we're going to go back and fill the holes and ask questions that they may not have asked. But there's enough out there to indicate that just looking at traffic stops that we've probably got a problem. And I worry about that. I mean, I anecdotally, I know nobody who's white in their early 20s walking down the street with friends who's ever had a police car stop and walk over to them and say, where are you going? I've had multiple Black friends in that same age group, young professionals walking down the street and being asked, where are they going? I think there is disproportionality, and I think it comes from an underlying bias. I think when we look at the pretextual stops, I will be surprised if pretextual stops don't reflect a similar bias, particularly pretextual stops that aren't related to an actual investigation. I understand pretextual stops as a tool in an investigation. I do not understand pretextual stops as just a general way of finding an excuse to try to search somebody's vehicle. That is not acceptable. So I think you'll get more data very shortly.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a question from Rebecca Tan with the Washington Post.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for everyone for being here. I have two questions. The first for County Executive Elrich and Police Chief Marcus Jones. The first one being, we've seen dozens of protests in Montgomery County in the past couple of weeks, and it seems like people are eager for immediate action and change, particularly to do with the redirection of resources. Is there anything that the county is planning to do in the immediate term, such as with the fiscal 21 police budget? And secondly, do either of you have a response to those who think that the county is dragging its feet or moving too slowly on this issue?
I don't think we're dragging our feet. First thing you have to understand is, what are the police doing that you would want to divert? And so we've asked the department to provide numbers on where money goes inside the department. I'm sure people don't want to divert it away from things that people would agree are the actions or the activities police ought to be engaged in. We have to determine how much money is in activities that we don't think should be police jobs and can be diverted elsewhere. That's part of what we aim to get at with this, as well as working, with outside consultants to actually talk about what are the best diversion programs out there. Montgomery County has some diversion programs, but they all start with the criminal justice system. You can go to drug court. We could divert you in other ways, mental health court, but it's all is precipitated by an arrest. And I think, to other people's points, we need to intervene before there's ever arrest. We need to help people before people go off the rails, and then it becomes a mental health issue that's played out in public and has an impact on them and other people. We need to be doing a better job on that end. So we will get to this as soon as we see things that we can move. Then I think we're all going to be interested in starting to move those resources. But the first thing is getting the department to give us the breakdown on how different aspects of what they're doing today have an effect on the budget.
All right, thank you. Rebecca, I see that you do have a follow-up question for, you said Dr. Crowel and the council members?
Follow-up question for County Executive Elrich. So just to be clear, you're saying that the county intends to divert funding away from the police department, but it's just a matter of when? And then following up, for sort of related to that, question for Dr. Crowel, Councilmember Tom Hucker, and other council members who have proposed the expansion of the mobile crisis unit and the expansion of human services. Where do you think those resources are going to come from, especially in the middle of a recession that's been caused by this pandemic?
So let me talk about the first one first. Yes, I do anticipate that as we start making decisions that look at what police are doing that they really don't need to be doing, that should hopefully free up some resources. The challenge is going to be, how do you identify the time and the officers who are involved in doing those activities? Until we get data, we're not going to know how much money that's going to result in. But I think, the county is in slightly better shape economically than we anticipated. Having the amount of unfilled positions in our county budget has left us in a position where we have some flexibility. If we need to use flexibility, this is, we will make choices, and it won't just be police department choices. It may be choices about things that we do that maybe aren't the most important things to be doing. So I think we're going to have opportunities to find some savings. The amount of money that Tom put in there isn't giving any of us heartburn, and particularly since the necessity of it. We're going to have to find whatever savings we need to cover it, because this is one of the more important things we need to put in place, and to put in place as quickly as we can put it in place.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question from Dario Lopez from Telemundo.
Yes, thank you. My first question is for Executive Elrich. How your plan make communities that feel more vulnerable with the police, like the Hispanic community, feel safer? And for the Chief Jones, how the police department could avoid other PISOA cases?
So what we're going to do, particularly with the Hispanic community, is exactly what we've been doing since Leggett was county executive. We have made it clear that we are not enforcers of immigration policy. We have a pretty clear non-cooperation policy with ICE when it comes to dealing with immigrants. I mean, the only work that we actually will do with ICE is, human trafficking and things like that. But we do not engage in ICE enforcement activities. And we have worked with organizations in the Hispanic community repeatedly to put those messages out there. When Trump began some of his more egregious statements that really concern people in the Hispanic community, myself and council members were out there in the public reassuring the community that we are not arms of the federal government, but then particularly not arms of ICE. And we're going to keep doing that.
I'm sorry, Dario. I didn't quite understand your question for me. I apologize.
Chief, thank you. My question is, we remember the case from Mr. Pisoa at the end of the 2019, how your department could avoid another case like this with whether we know that the arrest was with a little the force, we use force more than the normal force.
Right. So again, it reverts back to training and to the focus on training and reminding our officers of the use of force policy. When officers are conducting business and they are making arrests and they go outside of our use of force policy, again, those are things that there are processes in place, such as we did in this case, referring a case such as this to the state's attorney's office for criminal prosecution. And so we will, again, we're holding our officers accountable, and they know that we will, not only pursue potential criminal charges in some of these cases, but we'll also, from an administrative standpoint, we will address that accordingly as well. So again, we continuously monitor our officers' behavior via body-worn camera footage with each use of force in order to make sure that we are staying within the guidelines of our policies that we have created. That is a very extensive policy as it relates to use of force.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the time, I know we were scheduled until 12 o'clock. I've been informed that the county executive does still have a few more minutes before he has to pivot to his next obligation. So for those who do need to drop off, I want to thank you for your time here. But I am going to try to squeeze in 3 quick questions. And then for some of our council members who did join us, if they want to quickly end with a closing comment, we're going to try to quickly squeeze that in. So the next one I have is, looks like Kevin Lewis from ABC 7.
Hi there. There's word within Montgomery County Police that the county is considering significant cuts to the department, possibly in the amount of hundreds of positions, both from the civilian side and sworn officers. County Executive Elrich or any of the council members, could you comment about that talk that's going through the rank and file?
I haven't had any discussion like that, so I have no idea where it's coming from.
Okay, and as a follow-up question, in looking at cases like Fernand Burhe, with the social worker proposal that is out there now, how do you see a case like Fernand's ending differently if the sergeant from 3D didn't respond, but rather a social worker?
I think we all can say something about this. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Kevin, that's a good question. I don't want anybody to have the implication that by proposing the special appropriation allowing us to hire social workers, I'm suggesting that any of those cases would have necessarily ended differently. But there's no question. I think it's widely held point of view that we don't spend enough on mental health, and we need more civilian mental health trained social workers out there in the community working with individuals who are struggling with psychological crises and struggling with substance abuse, both so that they have the more appropriate training and so that our police don't have to get called in. In the case of Robert White, there wasn't even a call involved. There was just a police officer in the community who saw Robert White. So, there's certainly no suggestion that a social worker would have been walking through the community or whatever. And in Fanon Berhe's case, I think it's fair to say if we could have provided more robust mental health services on the front end, identified people that are in crisis. My understanding of him was, and I'm no expert, but that he was an Uber driver who had been laid off and was experiencing a lot of emotional stress, economic stress. We need a more robust system of care in place to prevent situations like that. How it ended may have ended up in the same place, but the fact that we only have an armed officer to respond to calls like that means that we're sort of needlessly limiting ourselves.
So I looked at both the videos of Robert White and Mr. Berhe, more than I would like to have. And the thing that strikes me is how the incidents begin. Ultimately, it becomes a determinant of how they end in some cases. And it is not clear. The officer in the case of Berhe is responding to a call with a knife and residents who felt threatened. And that's a logical call for a police officer. How you respond when you get there and what's the first thing you do is really the question. I don't know whether Mr. Berhe might have made different decisions about charging the police officer, but without any effort to talk to the person when he was at a safe distance, right, and try to engage him and see if there was any way to talk him down, or if the call taker, which I don't know, had been on the phone long enough with the people who called that he could have relayed to the officer that the people who called, sorry about that. Let me kill this here. So if he had been able to, if he had been on the call long enough to know that those people were safe and not being threatened, there may not have been the urgency of dealing with Mr. Berhe so immediately, that there could have been a time for talk, there could have been a time for waiting for backup to get there. But not knowing what happened to the people who made the call may have placed some urgency on the situation. But so that tells me that one of the things we need to reform possibly is how we deal with the call taking. How long should a call taker stay on a call, and how much information should be continued to be relayed to a police officer who's answering a call, so that if it's not a life and death issue at that moment, that the officer knows that. And that may have given them the ability to start down a slightly different track than that. And with Robert White, the unfortunate thing is that officer turned on his camera too late. And so we have no idea what precipitated this other than the officer's description. But when that camera comes on, the officer and Mr. White are already on the path, and Mr. White's about to exit the path. And we know that the camera is that the cameras have 30 seconds of a continuous loop that they're always recording. So the camera was actually turned on 30 seconds after the beginning of that incident, which means we didn't see what the officer saw in the parking lot. We didn't see what the officer saw when he got out of the car. We didn't see what happened in any of the exchanges. There's a whole bunch we don't know. But that's another case, since there was no urgency and no crime being committed and backup was on the way, that a policy that would tell you you don't engage somebody until backup arrives if it's a non-threatening case, probably ought to be in place. So these are the things we have to look at, and we have to look at the SWAT team procedures. You know, under what conditions do you go to somebody's house at 4:30 in the morning? Was that necessary to prevent something that was going to happen at 6:30 in the morning, or was that just an option that you could take along with any other option? So I have lots of questions about this. This is what we want to get through the process of this committee, is looking at all our policies in depth and making sure that officers have more tools. You know, I think you all heard the phrase that, you use the tools that are in your toolkit. And if I give you a limited set of tools, those are the tools you're going to use. If I give you a limited set of instructions, those are the instructions you're going to follow. And we need to make sure we're providing better instructions and a better set of tools so that officers have more options and they're trained how to use more options.
So Caroline, just
Okay.
to add to that for just 10 seconds. One is that the videos of Mr. Fairhay and White tell the end of the story. They don't tell all of the upfront things that led into that piece. And I think that that's always a risk with the videos that show 30 seconds. But what I think we're talking about here today with the county executive is opportunities up front so that those calls don't happen, or when the officers do engage, there's an opportunity for a rapid response by some folks who might be able to help de-escalate a situation or avoid an escalation. And then the other one is, what's the backup? The backup could be a call for police, but it could also be other kinds of backup that come as part of that process. So I think all of those things are pieces that we have to work through to get to a better answer for this.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Crowel. Have a question from Chris Gordon with Channel 4.
Yes, thank you. And I will be brief. First of all, I know that this is a priority that you've been talking about long before the recent protests and in Montgomery County. So I want to ask a two-part question, and that is, number one, what does it look like? What are you trying to achieve? And and how will you know you got there? I also want to just go and backfill. It seems like you have a task force that will be launched by August 1st, a 13-member committee, and then you said something, I believe, about a second committee.
No.
Recommendation by January 18th.
That's the task force recommendation by January 18th. We're trying to provide both the committee and the council with as much information about policing as we can possibly provide. And so the point of having a larger committee to make sure we're capturing a large range of community input, as well as having people we know are interested in working on this, who can work with the consultant group and look at the data that comes in, look at proposals for what options we might have to help us produce a report that will be useful to the committee, which has a charge of basically ongoing oversight of the police department. We want to provide them with enough information to imagine what you would do, what you could do, and what we could do proactively with the police department that would help inform, the work they're going to be doing in the future. So I see these two things as dovetailing with each other. And as I said, we're going to invite those committee members to come on the task force and participate in the meetings, because they're going to see stuff and hear stuff and have the benefit of more information than they're ever going to get out of meetings. I'm concerned that the meeting process between oversight, getting organized, and everything else would result, would take a long time to get where we think we can get to in a relatively short period of time. And it doesn't, and that still leaves them with the job of oversight and making sure what's done is consistent with our policies.
All right. Thank you. We will address our last question, and then we will allow the council members who are still on the call to make some final comments. Last question for the day is from Judy Hers with Greater Olney News.
Judy.
Hi, thanks everybody. This question may be better suited for the chief, but I welcome anyone to answer it. I was the editor with the Gazette for 25 years. And back in the 90s, there was not a Friday or Saturday night that I did not send a reporter out to walk with police and other people in communities as part of a community policing effort. And all the stories we wrote, people loved that interaction. They appreciated what they were doing. It helped clean up neighborhoods. It helped people feel less afraid, and everything was very positive. So what happened to community policing? Was it a conscious decision that we don't want to do this anymore? Or did it just happen to go away on its own? And you know, through changes in leadership, did it just die off?
So Judy, I would disagree to some extent with that. We have, for example, I'll give two examples. We have a central business district team in downtown Silver Spring, as well as in downtown Wheaton. These officers, many of them on bike patrol, who work with our businesses to address issues, quality of life issues, and to address issues that don't always end in arrest. And so there are those, I think if you talk to some of those businesses downtown Silver Spring and have those discussions about some of those officers who are interacting, not only with the business community, but would also in some parts of the residential areas. I would also give you a case, for example, in Germantown. I know we talk a lot about downtown, but we sometimes don't talk about our other areas across the county, where we were having several issues with individuals being shot in the community up in Germantown Park. And I will tell you, the community was in an uproar and scared because there were literally drive-by shootings that were happening over the past couple of summers. And we were able to put our district community action team in that community that engaged with that community and provided a safe net for that community. And we no longer had any additional shootings in that community. And those are just some examples. And we have other examples of our officers engaging in communities and doing more than just from the function of a standpoint of protecting communities in the most dangerous situations. There's other examples that we could bring. So I know there's all these discussions that sometimes get distorted, I think. And this is, again, this will be the opportunity in this actual, on this committee task force, community task force, that we'll be able to share that information so people are well educated and can make educated decisions based upon the information that's presented before them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I know we want to pivot to our final comments. County Executive Elrich, I know you have to drop off. We do have a couple of council members who want to make some remarks before we end this media briefing. Mr. Elrich, do you want to speak now, or are you going to hang on?
I'm going to try to hang on. Yeah, I can hang on. I can get squeezed 10 minutes out of this.
10 minutes, okay. Council members, those that I see on the call, if you could be kind to provide some brief remarks. I'm going to start off with, I see Council Member Glass, Council Member Rice, Council Member Albanos, and then Council Member Reamer. So if we want to go ahead and allow Council Member Glass to speak, please.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate hearing everybody's comments, and I'm going to make mine very brief. As the council's point person on issues related to homelessness in vulnerable communities, we just moments ago had an HHS committee hearing on homelessness and taking a holistic approach to providing housing for all residents. And the connection to that and this conversation on policing is this. Over 50% of our residents experiencing homelessness are Black men, women, and families. If we want to make them and our community safer, we need more supportive housing, more mental health services, and less criminalization. And I look forward to working with the county executive and everybody on the council and on this call to making our community safer, more fair, and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. Next up is Councilmember Craig Rice.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to be brief as well. As chair of the Education and Culture Committee, I've seen some of the comments that have come across the chat around Montgomery County Public Schools and our school resource officers. I just wanted to highlight a couple things for folks to make sure that they're aware. Montgomery County is the largest jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, but we have the lowest percentage of school arrests at 0.1%. It is the lowest in the state. And also, while those may be a preponderance of students of color, and that is concerning, what we do want to find out is which of those actual arrests were things like guns, knives, drugs, things that would have resulted in arrest regardless of whether a school resource officer was on the site or not. And so from that perspective, that's the reason why we want to do the due diligence in getting the information. Clearly, we are not an arrest-happy county. Clearly, our school resource officers are not doing something that's foreign to what we see in other jurisdictions throughout the state. The reality is we're at the very bottom end. And so our memorandum of understanding, I would encourage that folks read it. We're going to be going through it as with our Montgomery County Public Schools School Board and Superintendent, and we'll start getting to some of the details and sharing that information with the community about what we find in terms of that data. And so that will be forthcoming shortly. I fully support where the school system is in terms of doing that analysis. We're going to be analyzing some of those results as well to make sure that the data is accurate and it gives us a clear picture of where we are in terms of arrests on school property. And so more will be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. We have Councilmember Albernos.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sturgis, and you've done a great job facilitating this discussion. I want to first acknowledge the significance and importance of having both Dr. Crowel and Chief Jones lead this specific effort together. I have the honor of serving on both the Health and Human Services Committee and the Public Safety Committee of the County Council, and could not agree more that we need to be more intentional and strategic in merging the efforts of both of these departments and others as well. Because we know that there are very complex needs of our county residents. They are multi-layered, and we are all committed to ensuring public safety for all of our residents, but we want to make sure that that is equitable and just and fair across the board, and want to put all of our first responders in the best possible position to respond to cases as they arise. And so I look forward to supporting this effort. I look forward to expanding upon the great work of this council thus far and partnering with the county executive on his team on ensuring a fair and equitable approach to public safety across the entire county. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Finally, we have Councilmember Hans Reimagine. Is Councilmember Reimagine still on the call? Okay, then I think that's it. Then we will have closing remarks by County Executive Elrich.
I want to thank everybody for their participation. I especially appreciate the comments from the police chief, from the union, and from Dr. Crowel. We all have to work together to change this, and I think we're on a track to do that. I have my own ideas. I've seen anecdotally enough things that have given me concern, but at the end of the day, data will rule out, and we want to know what are the real numbers, what is the actual situation on the ground. I appreciate the comments that Evan made about homelessness. we have a report which will be coming to you all from the committee we created on decriminalizing homelessness, which the report came out, unfortunately, at the same time coronavirus came out. So obviously our focus got somewhat distracted by the virus. But I think it'll be helpful to your committee work and to your work in general. We need to decriminalize homelessness. It is, anybody who understands the employment world, all you've got to do is be homeless and wind up with a charge against you for something you did that's not proper, and you now have a lifetime block to getting employment. Lifetime. It doesn't come off your record. And anytime you've got to answer a question and say, you know, have you ever been arrested? It's going to be staring at you. The same thing with, you know, young kids with, you know, small amounts of pots, or young adults with small amounts of pot. They wind up with a lifetime sentence of being unemployable or hard to employ. And you almost create a situation where people don't have any way of making ends meet except to live outside the law. And that is not a constructive process. And we know, you know, the statistics on our jail are truly frightening. And I wish Council President Katz were on this call, because he and I sat in a meeting with judges a couple of years ago. I was still on the council, and they were talking about sentencing and the number of people in jails, Montgomery County being part of that problem, who had mental health issues. And they said they really shouldn't be sentencing people to jails. They should be in hospitals, except there are no beds in the hospitals. And so the jail becomes the backup for not having beds in our mental health system or in the hospitals to deal with people who have mental health issues. And having a third of the people in our jail who present with that is seriously a problem. Having people whose lives are marred in the way where they can't possibly get employment or hard to get employment, all those things contribute to a problem that doesn't need to be there. And we need to figure out, how do we make people employable? Do we get the state legislature to expunge people's records and let people know that if you follow a certain course of action, your record will be expunged? I mean, people have to have hope and have to know that if I do X, Y, and Z, that at the end of that, I get my life back, and I get back my ability, whether it's to get a loan to go to college, which I believe was taken away from people with criminal records, to getting a job. So the issue of policing is tied into so many other things in society that we've got to be willing to look at all those other things and figure out how what we do broadly will bring down the need for police, period, as a start, and let it focus on, you know, truly on, you know, crime and keeping people from speeding down Georgia Avenue at 80 miles an hour, which I do think is something that we should expect the police to deal with. I don't know, people expect us to deal with that, but we need to do the things that are going to make it possible to bring about broad changes. And so if we want less policing and we want residents who are less likely to wind up in positions where they are policed, we need to make sure that people have choices and have the option of choices, that they give everybody a different path. They're much like everybody else. You set somebody on a path and give them a limited set of tools. Those are the only tools they have to use. So I look forward to this discussion. I look forward to the group we're going to put together and the people we're going to be able to bring in to help us work with this. I think that we will, within months, begin to lay out a path that we can move forward on, both in terms of programmatically and in terms of police policy. And I look forward to working with everyone on that.
Great. Thank you, County Executive Elrich. So this concludes our briefing for today. I want to thank everyone for your time and your patience. I know we went way beyond our 1 hour allocation. Thank you for all of the guest speakers. Thank you for all of the council members, the media, and everyone else who had an interest in joining in. This is a complex issue. However, you know, we look forward to continuing our discussions. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thanks.